Hi, this is Nelson with City Electric Supply, and this is a very simple training webinar that's built around lighting basics, the different types of lighting that are out there, what you're likely to run into, and how to identify the different types of lamps and fixtures that you're going to run into so that we can put together good, solid proposals for your customers and so that they will make sense. A quick word about lighting and getting into looking at this. Most people are intimidated just a little bit when they find out that they're going to go try to identify and count customers and do those types of things. But we all have to start somewhere. I started not even knowing what a light bulb was a little over 20 years ago. The first thing you need to know about lighting identification, look, you don't need to be a lighting expert to provide the information that we need to get to put together good, solid proposals for your customers. We're not doing brain surgery. We're not going to act like it. This can be very simple if you allow it to be very simple. And we're going to make this as easy as we can. Understand that having the basic lighting knowledge is going to make you a lot more confident when you go in and talk to your customers about this. It's going to build your credibility. They're going to be able to see that you at least have the knowledge you need to get the information back to put a proposal together. And having that confidence and credibility, it just improves the chances of why we're all here, of being able to sell a successful project and do something good for our customer, upgrade their facility, and help them cut both their energy and their maintenance bills. So to get started, the absolute most important tips, the best things that I can share with you to help identify lighting, don't get too wrapped up in the minutia. First of all, this guy. Ask for a facility maintenance staff member to go with you on account when you're at a facility. Look, you probably already know these guys. You're already a friend of theirs. They know where all of the lights are in the building, in the facility. They know what type of lighting is there. They've been choosing and replacing those. They know what voltage runs the lighting system. Let's just face it, they are the facility lighting experts. Take advantage of these guys. It will get you the correct information the first time, every time, and you don't have to worry about being right, wrong, or anything else. These guys know what they're talking about. The second tip, if you're having it installed by an electrical contractor, have that contractor go with you for the first few times or every time when you go to count a building. They know what the lighting is in a facility. It's easy for them to identify because they've been doing it for a while. They can also confirm the count and help with the labor quote while they're there. We don't have to guess quite as hard at it. And they can also help answer questions that might come up that a customer might have, the maintenance guy might have. They can just help all around. So that's the second tip. And the third tip is to take a look at the storage room where they keep the current light bulbs, they keep their replacement ballasts. If they have a light go out, where do they go? Or just about everybody has something on hand to be able to take care of that maintenance. They don't run to the store every time a bulb burns out. That'll help you identify the bulbs. If nothing else, do this with the last tip. Take photos of the fixtures and lamps in that storage room and also how they're hung or how they're mounted. Because if you can't figure out what they are, chances are if you've taken the right photos, we can on our end. That's kind of what we do. But again, before we get into actually looking at the different types of lights, one very, very simple principle. Let's keep this as simple as we possibly can. This doesn't have to be complicated. A lot of your competition makes it complicated on purpose. It doesn't have to be. Remember that in most cases, we're going to be doing a one-for-one replacement for fixtures. We're going to pull one down and put another one up. We're going to pull one lamp out and put another one in. Most of the modern LED retrofit stuff, most of the equipment, the lamps, the ballasts, the drivers, the fixtures, they're built specifically for that purpose, to be able to pull one down and have a replacement to go right back in its place. It makes the installation really, really clean, really easy to do. And most importantly, man, it's a lot cheaper. It costs a lot less to just do a one-for-one replacement. So the project makes good financial sense for your customer and they can actually afford it. Now, I provide you with a PDF to go through. There's some important lighting terms that are in there. I'm not going to sit here on a webinar and read those to you. We're not going to go over them and go through the definitions. But if you have a minute, take a look and just read through these and get a very basic familiarity with what's in these particular definitions of these terms. You're going to hear me say them. They're going to come up from time to time, and it'll just help you if you know what these particular items are, what they mean. The one term we are going to cover is Kelvin temperature. When we're talking about Kelvin temperature, we're talking about the color of light or the color temperature of the light. The system itself, why we call it Kelvin temperature, it's based on the Kelvin scale. So basically it gives us a standard so that we can compare the hue, the look, the color of light. A lot of people just simply refer to it as the color of light. Kelvin is very important in LED lighting. And we'll go over the most commonly Kelvin temperatures, what they mean, and why it is important. Let's start out with what you probably have at home, with what most people have at home. You'll find in restaurants, furniture stores, and we call that, it's 2,700 to 3,000 Kelvin, the temperature on the Kelvin scale. We also just simply refer to it as warm white light. Gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling. If you look at yourself in the mirror and you've got warm light in, if you're like me, you don't see every single wrinkle. You don't see every flaw that's there. It helps soften the light up, makes it much easier to go to. 3,500 is typically where most commercial starts. That's the bottom end of the scale. We also call it warm white. It's not easy to tell the difference between some of these different colors because there's not that much difference. But a lot of offices that have computers, that have creative people, this is the color when you get into one of these warm whites that they'll have because they don't like the glare. It just makes it easier for them to work. The most common color temperature that's out there that's been used is the 4,000 4,100 scale. Chances are that your doctor, your dentist, most department stores, this is the color of light that they have in. Offices, retail shops, general purpose lighting, this is the main part that's out there. Um, you'll find that a lot of people want to stick with this. They love it, and it's just what they've always been used to. The last one we'll cover is 5,000 Kelvin, which is actually daylight. It's what we consider and call daylight as opposed to cool or warm white. Um, this is the color that we use to match up colors, to match up paint. This is as close to getting to true color as we can get. What it's designed for is to reproduce noon on a summer day that's overcast. So it's as close to the actual color of an item or what you're looking at as you can possibly get. We use daylight lighting 5,000 Kelvin outside in virtually every case. Warehouses, production areas, those types of places where people are doing very delicate work definitely need to be in the 5,000 Kelvin scale. It's very clear for them. And you'll also find that a lot more people in office buildings, school buildings, retail, even in some cases, if you're in a parts store, something like that, they're now using 5,000. The main reason is it just makes everything look much brighter, much cleaner, much crisper. It's very good for color matching, and it's just a very good light source to work with. So in lighting, there is a very specific way that we measure lamps, and it's kind of unique to the lighting world. Most light bulb diameters are measured in eighths of an inch, as opposed to just calling it what it is, right? So if we look at a T8 fluorescent light bulb, which is 8/8 of an inch, which also means that it's 1 inch in diameter. And we can go through T12, 12/8 means that it's 1.5 inches, and so on and so forth, as you can see. So when we're talking about a par 20 or an R30 lamp, that gives you an easy idea of the diameter of that lamp and why we're calling it a par 38 or why we're calling it a T8 lamp. That way you know how those work. So the types of lighting, the most common that you're going to run into that are out there, by far the most common you'll run into is fluorescent. Everybody pretty much knows what it is, even though you may not know a lot about why the technology works. But there is regular fluorescent, and then there's, of course, compact fluorescent, which has made a big splash in the lighting industry 12, 10 years ago. It started to fall by the wayside a little bit more now, but that's a very often used type of lighting that you'll find in a lot of office situations. We have HID, high intensity discharge lighting, which we'll cover very pretty extensively as we come up, because there's a lot of that out there, and it's one of the least energy efficient types of lighting. We want to replace all of that we can. There's incandescent and halogen lighting, which were basically the same type of thing. We'll cover some of that. And then we also want you to know the basics of LED lighting, light emitting diode lighting. Why are we switching to that, and how do you identify and go through those things? So let's start at the beginning with the most common, with fluorescent lighting. So all fluorescent lamps need a power supply. We call that power supply a ballast. What that ballast does is it takes line voltage and it regulates the lamp's current so that it can start and light the lamps that are there. Very necessary to get in and make those work. Now, the old ballasts were magnetic ballasts, very heavy, very awkward. They cost a lot, but they actually work pretty well. You won't find those being made anymore. They're not being produced. All of the current ballasts that are being sold, most of which you're going to replace, are electronic ballasts. They don't work quite as well as magnetic. They don't last quite as long, which is another reason to get in and start switching some of this stuff out. Linear fluorescent lamps, what we're looking at. Let's go over the types of those. Bipin lamps for your typical 4-foot fluorescent lamp that's in most office buildings, your dentist office, those kind of places. The 2-pin, that's one of the most common things that are out there. When you see the long lamps, the 8-foot lamps that are in, most of those, the majority on the inside and indoors, will be single pin lamps like you see listed on that. And when you go outdoors, typically what you're going to see, whether it's a 4-foot, an 8-foot, or in refrigerator lighting, you get into the F72s, you get into a 5 or a 6-foot bulb. Those are high output. Now, one simple thing about high output lamps that you should know, they consume a lot more electricity. Most people assume because they say high output that we're referring to light output. That's not the case in fluorescent lighting. HO, high output lamps, are there to be able to perform in cold weather. Fluorescent lighting traditionally doesn't perform well in cold weather lighting. It's one of the reasons why LED flourishes so much out there. We'll cover that in just a little bit. But high output lighting uses a lot more electricity and is not putting out any more light. It simply allows that lamp to start up better in the cold and to stay brighter in the cold. But a lot of people haven't understood that. There are even a lot of architects who didn't understand that and went ahead and spec'd them indoors. Folks, it makes no sense to have high output lighting inside. For those who have that in place, we need to get that changed out for their own good, because they're not getting any more light out of those. They're simply using a lot of electricity to produce the same light that they would be with something that's using much, much less energy. Makes a huge difference to them. A little bit of the basics on how fluorescent lighting actually works. One of the reasons that we want to get rid of it is there's a small amount of mercury inside every fluorescent tube, and it mixes with the gases that are in there that allows it, once we put the current to it, the ballast takes that current then and it allows those phosphors to glow. And that's what produces the color or the Kelvin temperature of light. Okay, it's really a very simple process. It's been used for a long, long time. But one of the reasons that people want to get rid of fluorescent so bad is just that one word, the mercury that's involved in them. Now, it's a very, very, very minute portion of mercury, but it is nonetheless there. And if you get into an office building or someplace where you're replacing, 2,500 lamps, you don't want to go around breaking 2,500 lamps. That will release a little bit of mercury. So this is the basics of fluorescent. Where do we find fluorescent lighting? Some of these you'll recognize immediately, you've seen and you know. The different types of fixtures will go through office buildings, schoolhouses. You'll find them in high bays, fluorescent high bays where people have put them in gyms. 6, 8 years ago, this was the thing to do to get T8 or T5 fluorescent high bays put in to gymnasiums. We switched a lot of schools and different places out to put that in. In caves, in a lot of different places, you're going to also find strip lighting. I'm sure you've seen them. You know that they're there. Some are 8 foot, some are 4 foot, all different sizes of them. Those are all strictly fluorescent lighting. This is very, very common. We're not going to spend much more time on it because you know what this is when you see it. Now, we do have some T12s left, which are what we'll call the fat bulbs. The T8s are by far the most common, the ones that are an inch in diameter. And then you'll also find the tiny lamps, the T5s and the T5HO lamps. We want to replace all three of those types of lamps and that type of technology. Depending on what fixture it's in, we'll either switch it out with a lamp or we'll remove the fixture and replace the lamp. But we can be much more efficient with all of those types of lighting. So let's move from standard fluorescent into the small stuff, compact fluorescent lamps. You might run into a few of these spiral lamps, but overall, when we're looking into businesses, when we're looking commercially, these aren't what we're talking about. Yes, there are a few out there, but it's not the majority of what we're talking about. What we're really talking about are these, the plug-in CFLs, compact fluorescent lamps. With these, you have to have a ballast just like you do the other type, the standard fluorescent, to do exactly the same thing. These work on the same mercury gas principles, everything else that goes with it. Now, the spiral bulbs work that way as well, but the ballast is contained with that little squiggly spiral bulb. Okay, that's all together. These are separate. People want to get rid of these. These burn very, very hot. You're typically going to find this type of lamp up in a can light in the ceiling. When you find them in the can lights in the ceiling, like I said, they get very, very hot. Most of the time, the sockets that these run in will need to be changed every other time that they change a lamp. And that's not an easy process to go through. It's very cumbersome to be able to get up and get that done. Also, when you try to get up into the ceiling, the maintenance guys that are going around doing this to try to change out those ballasts, very difficult to do. They get very hot and they burn out very easily. People honestly are very frustrated with this technology. And most, if they had known when they were building a building or when they got into a building, if they had known there was even a ballast involved with this, would have never gotten into it. We have buildings across the United States full of this type of technology, and we need to get these changed out. So we do have ways to get it done where it makes sense financially, and people are anxious to get rid of these. So when you find them in a facility, be excited because people want this removed and want these gone. So let's move on to the next type of lighting. The HID, high intensity discharge lighting, just like fluorescent lights. HID lighting requires a ballast to be able to excite the same thing, a gas on the inside. Different types of gas for different types of lighting that go in there, but works on the same principle that the electricity excites the gas on the inside and makes the light bulb glow. That's how it works. The main types of HID lamps, now there are others, but these are the three main types that you'll run into here unless you're in California. In California, there's one other that they use more out there than anywhere else. We very seldom see it here, so we're not even going to cover it. But the three main types are mercury vapor, high pressure sodium, and metal halide lamps. Let's cover each one of those. The mercury vapor lamps that we talk about are very, very rare. Okay, they're the oldest type of HID lamp. Most of these have been replaced by metal halide because you can use a metal halide lamp to go right in and work with the same ballast. They do use a ballast to produce light, and they do put off a whiter type of light. It's not a yellow, it's a white type of light. You're not going to run into a whole lot of these. When you see a white light lit up, it's probably going to be metal halide. When we talk about yellow light, this is what we're talking about, high pressure sodium. It produces very yellow, I call it inefficient lighting, but it's only inefficient in that it's hard to see. under that type of yellow lighting. Actually, it puts out a tremendous amount of lumens. You just don't have any kind of color rendering. A lot of security cameras aren't able to do their job when this type of technology is being used. Most of high pressure sodium lamps are in a tubular shape, as opposed to bulbous. If you look at the line of lamps there, only the very small wattages come in a bulbous type. Everything else is a tubular type lamp. So when you look in a fixture, it's an easy way to identify that it's high pressure sodium. And of course, if it's turned on at night, if it's yellow, you're going to know what it is immediately. And the third type is metal halide, by far the most common lamp that's out there, produces bright, brilliant white light. And most of these are bulbous in shape. You're going to run into a tubular type every now and then. You probably won't know it though, even if you've seen it somewhere along the way. These are mainly bulbous. They all work the same way. They all have the ballast that works with these to go in. Ballasts are expensive, and these bulbs, HID bulbs in general, are very expensive to be able to get up and to replace. So to show you the difference between them, when you look at the high pressure sodium, compare that yellow light to the metal halide white light on the roadways. When you look at the way that it looks indoors or outdoors. Now, folks, if you run into a facility that has this yellow light on the inside, and there are still places who do this, you'll find caves, you'll find a lot of warehouses that are still running this type of light inside. When you find that, we really need to get that changed out. I can't even imagine personally having to work under that type of light all day, every day, and then come out into sunlight and into the real world. It's worse than the Batcave. At least the Batcave had toys, right, to play with. Very difficult lighting, but you can see there's a stark difference in the type of light. But the fixtures are all pretty much the same. Any of these three types of technology, any of the HID lamps, can go into the type of fixtures or the type of buildings that we're going to look at. Where do you find HID lighting? High bays and low bays, of course, gymnasiums, factories, all those different types of places, even retail. We've got a grocery store in the Kansas City area that still runs all metal halide lights. You'll find them in a lot of places, but you can find these as metal halide. These could have high pressure sodium in them. Same with these different types of things in parking garages, let's see, what's a good place? Canopy lighting. If you're walking at a strip mall, outside you look up, you probably see this square type of canopy lighting. These again can have any of those three types of lighting in them. Most of the time they're going to be metal halide, but they could very well have something else in them. Same thing with floodlights, gas station canopy lights, all of those type of things. These are HID lights that work, and your typical dusk to dawn light and the average everyday wall pack that we go to, HID, you find these on every building virtually out there. You'll find one of these types. Pole lights, almost all of the pole lights that you're going to run into will be HID lighting of one kind or another. With a glass lens on it, if you look up, you can typically see if it's a tubular or if it's bulbous, and identify that type of lighting. If you know the height of the pole will often tell us what it is, and it will also give us a good example. If we have a picture to see, we can probably tell just by looking at it where it goes to. That's a whole other webinar, and we'll get into that. But this is where you typically find metal halide and high pressure sodium lighting in that type of place. So let's take a look at the next type of lighting, which is what everybody knows the most about: incandescent and halogen lighting. Incandescent and halogen, goodness, these waste a tremendous amount of energy. The energy that's released in the form of heat rather than light compared to LED. These are high heat. In fact, this is what kills these lamps. The heat is what actually burns these bulbs out, as opposed to an LED bulb, which produces very little heat. Incandescent and halogen lamps easily replaced one for one by similar LED lamps, and 80–90% electric savings. When you get into restaurants, fast food, different kinds of places, we'll run through some, but these can definitely be replaced fairly easily. Here's the most common types that are out there. Typical screw-in bulbs that you find, the MR16s, tiny lamps that you see around, the reflector lights. Some of you may have the BR30s in your home, or a PAR 38. They cover the entire gamut. Where do we typically find these when we're out to look at them? You'll find them in restaurants. In a lot of cases, instead of using LED, they're still using these. And they're using LED, or they're using these because they don't think that LED can replicate the color of light. For some reason, the fallacy is out there. People think that LED lights have to be that bright daylight lamp. Well, that's simply not the case anymore. They were right 5 and 6 years ago. They're no longer correct about that. Now we can replicate very, very closely the same type of light that you have inside. So when they go to dim and get that ambiance in a restaurant, to get a nice soft light, we can reproduce that light now. If you get that kind of kickback from customers, there's your explanation for it. We now have the 2700 and 3000, 3500 Kelvin temperature lamps that we can use to get in and replace those. Fast food restaurants, which are typically brighter, but they still produce the same color of light. Now, a lot of these will like it if we go ahead and upgrade the color of light inside, but this is where you'll find the halogen and typically the incandescent style of lights that are there. Retail applications, furniture stores, goodness, it's hard to imagine how many are still using this type of bulb in place. There are some, Macy's is a good example. Kohl's, they have gone through and they've changed out theirs, and a lot of those have LED in now. But it's very simple when you talk to these guys. These burn out consistently and constantly and very quickly. They're having to be replaced all the time. When you run into these, we want to get rid of them as quick as we can. Another place that you'll find them, beauty salons, barbershops, conference rooms, because of their dimmable, that they are dimmable and they dim so well. A lot of conference rooms like to use these. Corporate offices like to use these. But again, we can now get down to the same type and color of light. So let's look at the last style, what we're looking at putting in. The LED lighting, light emitting diodes, which is what it stands for. This is solid state energy efficient lighting. Now, LED lighting has to use what we call a driver, which operates just like a ballast. I don't want to get too technical about it, but basically it takes also line voltage, knocks it down to a much lower voltage so that we're not harming the diodes. It just makes the diodes light at a very efficient mode. Okay, so we need a driver just like we need a ballast. Some things, some bulbs, some fixtures have them already built in, some they're more external, but there has to be some way of regulating that. And the diodes themselves are what actually produce the light. These are what actually glows and gets out there. LEDs are now available for almost every lighting application that you may run into. There are a few things that are a little bit more difficult right now to replace, but almost everything that you're going to run into, we can change them out and put in this type of technology, the LED stuff. So everybody likes to talk about the green factors, right? Well, let's remember, green's not just defined in one way. Green is defined in two ways. What a lot of people think about, especially in their personal lives and at home residentially, green is an environmental, right? Keep in mind that with LED, there is nothing hazardous in LED products and LED bulbs and fixtures in any way at all. There's no mercury in any of these. They're simply solid state lighting. They have a much longer lifetime, not nearly as many bulbs to go through. We don't need to produce anywhere near as many of them because they last a long time. And they use a lot less energy to produce a lot more light. So they're very environmental for the customers that you have, where that's their main button. There's your reasoning behind it. But when it comes to commercial, the other type of green, when we're talking to CFOs, when we're talking to owners of businesses, their green is this. It's financial. It's money. This is where their button is. So there are several things. Number one, you're going to save huge on the electric bill by installing these. We can virtually eliminate the cost of lighting maintenance, both in equipment and in the labor to put these in. So financially, LED is finally beginning to make sense. There are a few things that you should know about LED lighting that we're going to kind of give you a few secrets that a lot of people don't know, because LED represents a dramatic, just a complete fundamental change to our lighting industry. Um, the way that the technology is made, where it's made, how the technology is marketed and sold, it's a whole new ball game compared to the way that it used to be. Here's the dirty little secret. I'm going to go ahead and give it to you. What most people don't know, don't understand about the LED industry, okay? Most people don't understand how and where it's manufactured, how it's packaged, and how it's sold. Well, if you didn't already know, about 95 to 97% of all LED lighting comes out of China, period. That's just the way it is. To be perfectly bluntly honest about it, most LED lighting that's produced in the United States is so costly that consumers won't get in and buy it. And that's what stops people from installing right now. It's not that they don't want the technology, it's that it's cost so much. So the way that this stuff is packaged, the way that it's sold, these factories in China are producing for several different brands. Most brands, in fact, I don't know of any brand who owns specifically their own factory that produces only their own stuff. The best way I know how to explain it, this goes back a little ways, but in the 80s, I was living in Nebraska and I needed a job, and I didn't know what to do, but I finally got a job at a dairy, a commercial dairy in Nebraska. And my first day on the job, my job was to work in the blow mold, which was where we put the labels on milk before it got bottled, right? So I start my first day of work, of going through my job, and the day starts with these pretty labels, these bright, vibrant colors with reds and golds and blues and golds, and a couple of different brand labels going through, and everything's working fine. And as we get towards the end of the day, this ugly little black and white label appears. You know what I mean? The generic label appears. And as these bottles start to go through, nobody says anything. Nobody stops the line, and I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. So I reach over and I push the button and I stop the line, and everybody looks around at me, and the boss comes up like, are you hurt or what? And I said, no, but I just thought somebody should know that the generic bottles are getting ready to come through so that they have time to be able to switch the vats and so on and so forth. And some of the people around me giggled a little bit, and the boss looked at me and like I had to be maybe the stupidest person he'd ever seen. And he said, well, for goodness sake, what do you think we have? Generic cows? So it's all the same thing. It's all the milk coming out of the same vat. It's not different. It's just packaged. It's labeled differently, and we charge less for it, but it's exactly the same milk. Well, that's the way the LED industry is too, folks. You won't find many manufacturers or brands who admit it. I've worked for major manufacturers, I've worked for second tier, and I've worked for third tier manufacturers over the last 5 years traveling the country. And I can tell you without exception, those are the companies that I work for, and most of those companies do the same thing. They produce off of exactly the same lines. They just put a different label. They might put a little different type of lens or something on it. There are good factories. There are bad factories. There are knockoff factories. You have to be very careful with LED. But guys, that's what you pay me for, right? That's what we do, is we've gone through all of these different manufacturers. We've sorted through all of those that we know. We know the factories that they're being made out of. We know the good stuff from the bad stuff. Now, there is a good, better, best level system as well, depending on where you need to be in a price range. But we're always going to get you technology that we're confident in, that has a 50,000 hour minimum lifetime and at least a 5-year warranty on it. Now, when we talk good, better, best, best is talking technology that will back it for a full 10 years and call it 90, 100,000 hour operating time. Um, but with the different brands that we carry, we have done the research. We've spent literally weeks with parades of people coming through to where we could check their stories and see exactly who had what and where it was made so that we knew that they could back up what they did. You can have confidence in what we're going to be able to put through. With CES's national buying power that we have, we can work with virtually any brand out there that we want to work with. And we can work with some that nobody's ever heard of who have exactly the same thing for a fraction of the price that that name brand costs. So working with us, we've done that homework for you. That's enough on those types of things, but I thought you might find it interesting to see that this is a completely different way that things are working. But back to the subject at hand, just very quickly keep in mind, this is all meant to be simple, okay? Let's not make this hard. Let's not make it complicated. As we go into the next webinar, we're going to give you a few tips, a few extra tricks on how to, again, identify the information we're going to need, the pictures that we can take, the photos while you're there. If you want to take the photos of how to get them to us, we're going to cover all those. But let's not make this difficult. This is very, very simple if we allow it to be simple. I will tell you one more of the secrets in the industry very quickly, which is most of your competition, if we run into competition, make this as hard as they can. And they do that on purpose because they're trying to cover up for why they're charging high prices that they charge. They're trying to cover because they know they're going to have warranty issues. So they're trying to take care of that up front. Look, this is very simple, very basic. Remember these very 4 best ways to help identify so that you don't get intimidated. The maintenance guy, the contractors, being able to take a look at what's in their storage closet and taking the photos. All of those things, if you can't identify it right off the bat, we can in almost every case by going through and doing those kind of things. So that is our webinar on lighting basics, the different types of lighting that are out there, and a little bit on how to identify what's there. We'll cover all of this in the following webinars a little bit more in depth. But for now, that gives you a basic idea. Take a look at the PDF material that we've given you. Read through those definitions without having to listen to me talk again. You can go back and review this material. Take that PDF with you when you go out to count and do things for the first couple of times. And it will probably help you to be able to get in. Most importantly, don't feel intimidated, because if you run into something that is too big and you just don't know how to do, we'll figure it out, okay? It's not something you have to worry about. Thank you for taking the time to go through this, and we'll talk soon.